Shrapnel Ballista has a really specific line on the skill gem that says enemies can be hit by multiple arrows from the same attack. So that's what we're doing in this build. We're hitting enemies with multiple arrows from the same attack. It's just a use of intended mechanics explicitly written on the skill gem. That's what's going on here. To be more specific though, that line also applies to Sniper's Mark. Now normally that wouldn't matter because Sniper's Mark just allows projectiles to split off from the enemy and basically just disappear. However though, when you add on Nimbus or any source of return projectiles, all those projectiles can then return, and as far as I know, it's one of the only skills in the game in which those returning projectiles from Sniper's Mark specifically can actually go and then hit the enemy again. Now for my specific build, I'm running 12 base projectiles off of multi-prod sources, Shrapnel Ballista itself, Deadeye Ascendancy. I have 8 totems shooting in my single target setup, and I have 12 splitting projectiles from Sniper's Mark due to mark effect scaling. And finally, I have about 1.9 attack speed per ballista out. This equals roughly, I don't know, 2,000, 2,300 projectiles per second. So the DPS estimation, even though in POB it says I have 121k DPS, is roughly 275 million DPS. Now, this isn't actually my concept. The first time that I actually saw this was from a YouTuber called Owen Tang, and he had built this on a relatively cheap budget in softcore trade with a really high damage build, able to basically one-shot Uber bosses using Shrapnel, Ballista, Return, and Nimbus, but was really ZHP. My build is almost entirely invested into defense. The Mage Blood, the Progenesis, everything, probably 90 to 95% of the build cost is invested explicitly into defenses. And this is because I want to make this an HC viable build for Uber boss farming. Now, it's not exactly safe, I guess. It is viable, but not really safe for Uber boss farming. And the reason that this is the case is because my frames just die. And when a lot of things in Uber bosses can completely disable your recovery, well, you know, a freeze for 1 or 2 seconds can lead to your death, absolutely. That said, I've still been using it to farm Ubers because I don't really give a shit. The first thing to note is that I am 90 all res, and the way I'm able to achieve this from a res perspective, not a max res perspective, is basically because I'm using Mage Blood. I think without Mage Blood you have to use like Pathfinder Jewels or something and go perma flask, because it's just way too res intensive these days to run melding and not have sources of res from like your flasks or from other nonsense. Melding is enabled by max cold res tattoos. These tattoos of the Arahangui Makanga, something like that, I don't really know. And I took this setup basically off of Exile, who took it off of, I think, Rue, who took it off of maybe Reddit, or maybe he made it himself. I don't really know. I can't really understand what that guy's saying half the time. So, the core is on a natural instinct, which allows your unallocated small passives to grant effect. So, because these aren't allocated, that bottom line of requiring no adjacent passive skills pretty much always works as long as, you know, they're not allocated. So this is really powerful. 3 max res here. The other really strong setup is Warrior's Tail, because this doubles effect of tattoos in your radius. You put it over here and you get 1, 2, 3, 4 max cold res tattoos. And then I'm also running the Honor Tattoo of Makanga over here, which is an 8-node connection, and that gives you 2 more max res. There's also a little bit of space elsewhere. There's, you know, Survivalist down here. There's also a boot implicit, or a glove implicit rather, that you can go for. So that's pretty crazy that you can achieve 90 max res without any purities. It also opens up your chest slot, which is really big because I'm running Lightning Coil, another source of +1 max res for my build. Without a Fizz as conversion setup, I almost have no physical mitigation on this build because I have 1.3k armor and I'm a freaking Deadeye. Now in terms of other mitigations, this build is also ailment immune because I'm running Purity of Element, and I do this also because res is really hard to achieve on a melding build, but it's also really strong relative to offensive options because bow builds tend to not scale that well off flat offensive auras. I mean, Hatred's really strong if you're a Fizz bow. The other ones like Anger and Wrath, they're kind of just okay. It's also stun immune, and I get this through a mix of Perfectionist, which is, you know, some stun avoidance here, this node, which you already need to take because of the Honor Tattoo of Makanga, 2 nodes from Heart of Oak, and then a couple stun avoidance tattoos, although I kind of forgot where they are. But those are on Dexterity, and they're really easy to get. The next thing I want to talk about is Fizz as conversion. So not only am I running Lightning Coil, I also run 2 different Fizz as on Helmet. This is really standard. Pretty much across the board, you'll see a lot of this. And I could also opt for Taste of Hate, but instead of that, I actually run a Strangle Gasp Amulet swap. And it basically swaps out one of my anoints. It swaps out the anoint from over here, Honor Tattoo of the Hunter, over to Master of the Arena. And this gives me another 5% Fizz taken as, because I'm running a really crazy lethal pride that I had to self-farm because no one on hardcore really runs 5 ways. There's also 2 more Fizz as on Fury Bolts, and there's also 1 more on Revelry. Now, if you are on softcore, you probably just get a bunch of double damage ones instead of taking Fizz as ones. Up to you. I don't know. Depends on what you want, but I really want to have pretty solid physical mitigation. If I'm able to click this, though, you can see that my phys mitigation goes from 27 to 37. So this sort of thing actually makes a huge difference for phys mit, but I do think a 28k max phys hit is probably good enough for most of the game, considering that's like way more than a, Uber Shaper Slam that crits even. The other thing that this build does pretty well is solve recovery sometimes. Now, I have a lot of projectiles, right? I have like 2,000 projectiles, and I also have instant leech from this mastery. And then I also have totem leech, which allows your phys damage from totems to leech. I don't actually run like conversion, so I do have enough physical damage for this to pretty much always cap on my HP instantly, as long as my totems are hitting something. The bigger issue is that your totems die a lot, especially in Uber fights. Pretty much every single mechanic that is AoE in an Uber fight will one-shot your totems. The other thing is that I don't know how much recovery matters because you're mostly one-shotting bosses anyway. So, I mean, this is here. I don't know how I feel about it, but it's here for now. I almost forgot to mention, I'm running a phys taken as Purity of Elements Watcher's Eye. This also has precision flash charge generation, and this actually gives me much better uptime on Progenesis, or if I run any other flask here, it really helps out with generation there. I would much rather have a double or triple phys as Watcher's Eye for Purity of Elements only, because I think that would just solve your phys mitigation really, really easily. Beyond defenses, there's one really, really important mechanic to note, and I almost completely forgot about this. Mark scaling is really strong, but guess what? So is projectile speed scaling. Like Winner, Shrapnel Ballista needs to hit a certain projectile speed threshold before you start getting really, really consistent returns. I don't know that it's even a clean threshold, but it is more specific than Eye of Winter is. I'm running at 312% total increased projectile speed. I found that the jump from 250 to 290 was like a huge gap. I'm talking like double, maybe triple damage. Something really, really crazy. I probably wouldn't play this build at under a ×4 multiplier, so 300% increased projectile speed. Roughly in that range. If you don't get that projectile speed, you won't have the returns, and your damage will really suffer. Now, the rest of the gearing should be fairly straightforward. I'm running an LE bow. I did my prefixes, bought those from Mosh, and then I just Ashlinged the suffix, I think, and then, I veiled Chaos the suffix for this. Crafted on crit chance. Quiver, projectile speed, 2 modifiers, really strong, and this actually lets you take more mark effect tattoos on your tree, which is really great. I'm running this pig face bassinet for double phys suppression, life, pretty normal stuff. Lightning coil for max physical mitigation. The implicits on this are really good. That +2 max res is highly efficient because that's for melding, and then the mark effect is really strong. Again, you need a lot of res, suppression, that sort of thing. On boots, I do run brittle ground. I don't know that you actually need brittle ground. It's kind of just okay because bosses tend to die before they drop here anyways. I should probably be using the generic brittle ground instead. Strangle Gasp is my amulet. Obviously, I corrupted it. I tried to make it rare. I tried to do this 3 times. There are no more Strangle Gasps on all of Hardcore Trade, so that really sucks. But the anointments are really powerful because they give you access to 2 more totems. They give you access to maybe 2 more phys modifiers if you want. And if you already have those things on your tree from pathing, you could go for Mark Effect instead from over here at Expert Hunter, which I think is also really strong if it pushes you to a new threshold for Sniper's Mark. The most important item in this whole build is Nimbus. Not really surprising. It's probably one of the strongest items of the whole game when you do use it properly. We'll see what happens to the next patch. And then this Amethyst ring just rounds out my Chaos res and my other res just a little bit. Mage Blood, really, really, really strong for this. This is just the double corrupt that I had. I mean, yeah, this is a pretty good item. And then my flash setup is pretty much just for a lot of resistances. Nothing too specific here, but the mana cost helps out quite a bit. I've already talked about the jewel setup, I believe, and everything in here. So the only thing that's left to mention, I believe, is this. I have Ancestral Bond over here from tattooing, the Journey of the Mechanga or something like that. I think that's what it's called. I was actually looking for Lethe Shade. I've rolled this single node about 20 to 30 times now, and I can't really get Lethe Shade, which really sucks. I'd actually prefer not to run this, because you definitely can't run Ancestral Bond while you're mapping. And this is why. Because when you're mapping, you're just a Lightning Arrow build. Right, I'm running a Lightning Arrow in a main 6-link with Trinity, increased crit, whatever, Inspiration if you feel like you want more mana. The reason I don't run Inspiration in my main clearing setup is because I wanted to more frequently proc Mana Forge arrows. And I'm pretty socket starved on this, so I don't really want to life tap my Mana Forge arrows either. I also tend to run Peacock in my main links because I think that's roughly comparable with increased critical strikes as far as your damage goes, but it also gives you much more damage for single target on Shrapnel Ballista, and makes your gem swaps have to happen less often. The aura setup is really, really narrow. It's just Grace, Precision, and Purity of Elements. I don't really know if there's anything else I'd really want to grab. I guess you could go Haste, but because I'm running Mage Blood and a reduced cost Flask, I'm able to run Divine Blessing with Haste over here instead of this full Haste. I don't know what my config is really doing here. That tends to be pretty good. The last thing to know about gems, Ensnaring Arrow. So ensnaring arrow usually doesn't work with Sniper's Mark, but because I'm using return with Sniper's Mark, for some reason ensnaring arrow does actually work, and it will actually tag the bosses after an ensnaring arrow comes back and returns. So for single target, I just swap lightning arrow with ensnare, or I swap lightning arrow with frenzy and then swap them around. But having this apply is actually pretty solid. I think it's roughly in the range of a 10% more damage multiplier, just because that 20% increased damage taken from hits is actually additive with Sniper's Mark, and I have a lot of mark effect for Sniper's Mark, so, you know, yeah, it's not quite as good. So if I could do this build over on softcore trade, there's almost no way I'd go for this particular setup. I think in the top end, a strength stacker hits probably in the range of about 2 billion damage without sacrificing much defensively at all. I mean, you wouldn't go for melding, but you have something like 6k HP. The strength stacking Shrapnel Ballista stuff has been so strong for so long already, and having an interaction like this, which multiplies your damage by like, I don't know, 10 or something absurd like that, is pretty crazy, right? The big problem though is that on hardcore trade we literally don't have the items. As of the last time I checked, there was one single split personality with strength, and it was the one that I self-farmed with my chieftain sim farmer. And I mean, I'll probably spend the next couple of days inside a simulacrum on the chieftain just trying to farm something good, but honestly the access to items makes building a strength stacker really hard. But at the top end I think it's perfect for this build. I mean, it's already using Shrapnel Ballista, it's already got a ton of damage, it can use things like original sin really efficiently, and I can't wait to see that get set up by a few other people, and that will really be the big pumper. Not that you ever really need 2 billion DPS anyway.